Pentiment is special. At its core, it is a historical narrative game with point-and-click mechanics and rudimentary role-playing systems, but with a very strong focus on the plot. Most notably, the game takes place during the 16th century and is set in a fictional Benedictine abbey and the surrounding area. The places you visit are crafted with meticulous attention to detail and historical accuracy and represent a typical German town in Bavaria during that era. You take on the role of Andreas Mahler, an artist who traveled to the tranquil town of Tassing to complete his masterpiece. In the course of the first act, however, an unforeseen event puts Andreas in the awkward position of having to act as a kind of private detective. From that point on, in addition to painting, Andreas now also has to solve a murder case. This is only the setup for a much larger story spanning multiple years. It's merely the beginning of a grand tale that will change Andreas' life forever. I don't want to reveal any more about the story at this point. As I said, it is at the heart of the game, and it is definitely worth experiencing for yourself. Technically, I shouldn't even like this game. Despite the unique setting and enticing story, I realized early that Pentiment had very strict time constraints and would prevent me from experiencing all the content available. As a result, at first I felt like I was making wrong choices all the time and the game wouldn't give me enough time to solve the mystery. How did the game make me feel this way? Well, Andreas has a strict time limit to solve the case assigned to him. At first, it seems perfectly feasible to complete everything within the given deadline. However, the game is deliberately designed in such a way that the player must clearly decide which clues to follow, knowing fully well that other clues may have to be neglected. To achieve this notion of hastiness, Pentiment divides the day into predefined sections similar to games like Majora's Mask or Shenmue. Some inhabitants of Tassing can only be found in certain places at certain times. At lunchtime, some people may be willing to talk about random stuff, but nothing relevant to the plot will be discussed here. In order to get real evidence and formulate a theory as to the perpetrator of the crime, it is completely up to you how to spend your day. Some activities or conversations may seem irrelevant at first, but will turn out to be incredibly enlightening in hindsight. You may feel like making wrong choices, but in actuality, every action you take will give you little hints and nudges in return. You eventually really do end up feeling like a detective putting all the puzzle pieces together. At first, adding time constraints to restrict the number of ways to interact with the world left me rather perplexed. If, like me, you have a tendency to be a completionist and want to do everything in games, you will quickly be quote-unquote disappointed with this game, as this is simply not possible. However, the game is very aware of this and actually incorporates your frustration as a player into the game's plot. At one point, Andreas himself proclaims that, given so little time, it is nearly impossible to gather all the evidence and reach a conclusive judgment. The game knows that you are annoyed by this. It purposefully puts you in the shoes of someone who has to make the best of the little he is given. It makes a point here that no matter what theory you end up presenting to the judge, there will never be certainty that your conclusion was correct. I think that is pretty brilliant, and on top of that, it also increases the replay value. Nevertheless, it should be said that you have to let go of the idea of wanting to achieve everything and do everything right. If you can't do that, you should stay away from Pentiment. In terms of narrative design, you can really tell at every point how much time and effort has gone into the world building and the writing. As many reviewers have pointed out before, Pentiment is a game set in the late medieval period that manages to tell a compelling story without relying on fantasy elements. The plot has a number of twists and turns, but never feels contrived or unnatural. The events, as they are depicted in this game, feel like they genuinely could have taken place in one way or another in the real world, even though it is a purely fictional tale. In a way, the events of the game follow a similar pattern as in Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose, a book that obviously served as inspiration for Pentiment. The game's director and writer Josh Sawyer said as much himself and created an equally compelling mystery with this game. Just as in the book, the dark and buried secrets are revealed bit by bit, never giving too much away and never being too outlandish to actually believe. As a fan of the book, I enjoyed this gruesome tale thoroughly until the very end. It is a true masterclass in narrative design. Pentiment touches on themes like religion, customs, the assimilation of quote-unquote pagan legends and traditions by the Catholic Church, the role of women, Martin Luther's Reformation, and many more. The game doesn't only cover a wide range of mature themes, but also dares to discuss each one of them on a deeper level. I have to admit that this is something I've never experienced in this form in any other game. It's truly incredible how the writers managed to make everything seem organic and never forced or artificial. Once again, this shows the strength of the narrative. If I had to criticize anything, I can only think of 2 points. Firstly, it unfortunately happened from time to time that a conversation with one of the NPCs was rendered incorrectly on screen. For example, sometimes a dialogue between me and one of the NPCs was played twice in a row, or several conversations were displayed in the wrong order. This is a shame, but it's probably unavoidable in a game that allows so much freedom in how the player engages with the plot. The second point of criticism is more of a personal grievance and probably applies to only a very few players. As I said before, at the heart of the game lies a murder mystery. You spend a lot of time walking around Tussing, talking to people, collecting evidence, and formulating theories. About halfway through the game, I had a strong suspicion about the involvement of a specific character in the circumstances of the murder. However, the game gave me no opportunity to follow up on this suspicion. At the end of the game, it turned out that my theory was correct, and it left a somewhat bitter taste in my mouth, as the game didn't let me act on it before. I realize that it may sound utopian, but in a game that places so much emphasis on the player's freedom, I expected to be able to investigate in any direction I deemed reasonable. Unfortunately, this was not possible. To sum up, I can only wholeheartedly recommend Pentiment to anyone with a fondness for well-written crime stories with a medieval flavor. In a way, Pentiment delivers what Telltale Games promised for years but could never really deliver. The story of the game really is influenced by how you play. This is not just a marketing promise, but a reality. Decisions made by the player in Act 1 still have an impact on the course of the third act 15 hours later. You don't only experience the immediate consequences of your own decisions, but also see how life and the people in Tussing change in the long term. I constantly second-guessed myself if everything would have turned out better had I made a different decision at the time. I have never experienced this feeling of guilt to that degree in any other game before. Pentiment proves what a powerful narrative and emotional tool games can be, and deserves all the praise it gets. I can only hope that the many positive voices will lead to the game becoming a success within the scope of its possibilities, and that we will see more passion projects like this in the future. An absolute recommendation on my part. Thank you for your attention.